You're listening to I Can't Have Children, Now What? From Tutum Global, hosted by Jobi Tyson. If you're seeking answers about infertility and childlessness, this is the podcast for you, using research and lived experiences to solve history's infertility medical mysteries, while courageously taking you behind closed doors to face the question mark for 1 in 5 women sharing the same dilemma. I can't have children. Now what?
From Tutum Global in Atlanta, this is I Can't Have Children, Now What? I'm your host, Jobi Tyson. Thank you so much for listening to episode 2. I can't wait to jump into today's topic. But before we get started, all of you out there listening, make sure you're downloading and subscribing to us on all streaming platforms: Apple Podcast, Google Play, Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and Spreaker. And don't forget to leave a review, rating, and share with friends to help spread the word. Okay, so today's episode is called Curse of the Barren Woman. And I'm going to discuss the historical context of barren women, the evolution of childless women, religious and societal taboos, and the cultural consequences. Before I begin, let me tell you why I chose the title Curse of the Barren Woman. Firstly, I'm fully aware that the word barren has been used as a harsh word often said to demean women who can't have children. So I thought it was important to trace the origin of the term barren and the word curse as it relates to infertility, and then I'll break down its correlation with today's world. And you may be surprised to learn that these answers stretch back from the first years of the world's existence. Yeah, I went all the way back in research because, like I always say, if you want to know the ending, start from the beginning. Humans are historical creatures, and the ability to place our own experiences in historical perspective could help more than you know. So nothing is too taboo for this episode, because understanding the history of infertility can help in coping with childlessness. So stay tuned. Fruitless, unproductive, profitless, waste, worthless, dispensable, destitute, devoid, useless, empty. These are definitions of barren. These perceptions create taboos and stigmas around childless women. As an involuntary childless woman, it can be daunting to look back from our ancient and heavily documented history to modern day to find a place where childless women feel visible. I wanted to find the origin of when and why shame was cast on barren women and women with infertility. So my research spans around 1450 BC to 1400 BC, perhaps 3,400 years ago or so. The first historical document in which scholars believe was the first book to be written that I use as reference was none other than the book of Genesis in the Bible. I chose Genesis since it narrates the primeval history of the world, which is the first 11 chapters, seemingly told as the story of the first years of the world's existence. I thought it was important to begin my research on religion's impact on barren women, since religious taboos still impact childless women today. And believe it or not, I didn't get past the first chapter before reading "Be fruitful and multiply," meaning the more children, the more fruitful. So right off the bat, this made an assertion of social exclusion on barren women with their inability to procreate. So let's move along to the origin of the word curse as it relates to barren women. This word stems from the curses of the law stated to be given to Moses by God, stating that if the nation were to be obedient, there would not be any childless couples or even animals among the people. As a feminist, I must note that in the Bible, not only does this law not require him to explain himself, but I observed that attention was only drawn to the women who were considered barren, never the men. So what this does is makes infertility a women's issue and paints a stark picture of childless women, resulting in emotional and social struggles. I actually found many examples of barren women in the Bible and also found that barrenness, and this is important to remember, was not inherently a sign of punishment upon an individual. But given the ancient cultural setting and according to the charge of Genesis, it's understandable how religious taboos can perpetuate stigmas and myths on childless women. After decades of feeling inadequate as a barren woman from my religion, society, and culture, and after delving into this research, I would argue that the Bible's treatment of infertility was that it was a topic unknown to them, as it was full of stories with people in the ancient world generally speaking of fertility in agricultural terms, with conceiving of reproduction as the male planting a seed into the fertile field of the female. So although infertility is frequently addressed in ancient history, the womb remained in a place of immense mystery, which means the scientific details were not determined. So since the beginning of time, 6th and 5th centuries BC to be exact, there has been a huge curse, as you will, attached to female childlessness, rooted from perceived stigma, which leads to internalized shame, all due to lack of knowledge and humanity. So the overall idea that barrenness is a curse simply cannot be substantiated. Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. Now we're going to move on and talk about how childlessness and infertility was talked about throughout the centuries. Now I'm going to touch on the historical aspects throughout the ages of infertility that has a long history of being stigmatized in societies around the world. This is crucial to understand how and why the stigma has developed in the way it has, and why infertility remains in many respects a taboo subject. It seems infertility has been stigmatized in many different societies throughout history. Noble women in medieval Japan were looked down on if their marriages remained childless. In 16th century England, childless women suffered because motherhood was perceived as the most important marker of femininity. By the 1700s, infertility was beginning to be better understood in these centuries. However, the infertile woman was still seen as broken, even as medical understanding crept forward. Moving to the 1800s, infertility was thought to be a mechanical problem caused by disorders of the reproductive system. But women were still meant to be delicate, fragile beings who couldn't even exercise for fear of doing themselves and their wombs some damage, assuming it could loosen the uterus and disable them from bringing children forth. And in 19th century France, many doctors linked childlessness to abortion, venereal disease, or promiscuity. And in some African countries, barren women lost their standing in society. Nevertheless, even centuries later, motherhood weighs heaviest in society's definition of womanhood, and women still bear the brunt of blame for fertility problems. And in some circumstances, women are also stigmatized for seeking help, since by the mid-20th century, there was much debate over artificial insemination by donor sperm and in vitro fertilization, or IVF. You know, the arrival of IVF brought infertility as an issue into the public domain, which falsely led people to believe that it was a modern problem that could be solved. But with stigma comes a lack of understanding, which can be invalidating and painful.
And now a quick break to hear from one of our sponsored affiliates, Booking.com, where our listeners can escape the city and spend your vacation or staycation at adults-only hotels and destinations. Along with Booking.com, we've curated adult-only outings just for you. If you're interested in booking an adults-only trip, whether afar or local, visit www.tutumglobal.com/travel for great deals right now.
We're going to move on and talk about if women around the world from the beginning of time have dealt with this issue. Why is there such a stigma behind childless women? And how can we break the stigma and begin to cope? Despite this historical evidence, many people persist in thinking about infertility as a product of the modern age. But as indicated, Barren has been used for centuries to stigmatize childless women as inferior, often shunned, using their barrenness as a sign of physical or moral deficiency. With that being said, each of us has a biased worldview because we can only see through the lens of our own perspective. We can only see what comes before us, we can only hear what is around us, and we can only read what stands in front of us. As childless women, we hold the definitive version of our reality. So it's up to us to change the narrative on female childlessness by owning our voice. Now let's talk about stigma coping strategies. As childless women, we're all in this together. So it takes all of us as a global society to educate people around us about the reality that infertility is more common than people realize. So it's imperative to not only own your voice, but speak out against stigmas. Also, the long history of childlessness can help us debunk myths, share our stories, and draw on the vast human experience of childlessness. And I know that the issue of infertility is one that cuts deep and hits home for many women, and stigmas affect how involuntary childless women see themselves. As a childless woman, I can attest that you may not ever be completely content with the lack of bearing a child. But that does not make you a useless woman in this world. Your life is yours. And just because you are childless does not mean there's not life beyond childlessness. So be good to yourself. Don't let anyone, including yourself, persuade you that your grief doesn't measure up against greater tragedies. So don't suffer in silence, because you can also cast a negative stigma on infertility simply by not discussing it. Barrenness in any area of life allows you space to challenge yourself to uncover new possibilities, to seek new adventures and discoveries that will enrich your understanding of the world and your place in it. There is truth in your pain, and emotional pain is not something that should be hidden, because most importantly, there is growth in your pain. So don't allow anyone, including yourself, rob you of the fullness for which you were created, because life is what you make it. Well, I hope this episode opened your eyes for a glimpse of what centuries of history tell us about childlessness today, to help you understand that in all centuries, women have had to cope with this experience and learn from their struggles. So thank you for listening to I Can't Have Children, Now What? This podcast series is about infertility journeys resulting in childlessness. It's about thinking for yourself, but also thinking as a community, gathering knowledge from personal experiences, investigating infertility's medical mysteries from a woman's perspective, and the healing of women who are childless not by choice or by circumstance. Make sure to visit our website at ican'thavechildren.com, where you can subscribe to the show on your favorite streaming platform so you'll never miss a show. If you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. And please follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Childless Women. If you have requested topics and questions, visit us at ican'thavechildren.com. From Tucson Global, I'm your host, Jobi Tyson.
You've just listened to the I Can't Have Children, Now What? Podcast with your host, Jobi Tyson. If you're enjoying our podcast, tell a friend, family member, or coworker about it. You can support this podcast and get exclusive bonus content, episode transcripts, polls, and more by becoming a monthly patron at ican'thavechildren.com. Thanks for listening.